about research. First paper is by Jeffrey Grayfield and Jameson Hayes from University of Georgia. This is an extremely ambitious paper because they propose a micro-payment model for the newspaper industry.
We present to you, basically, we start with the assumption that micropayment in and of itself will not work. So what we're presenting to you is a modified news micropayment model that takes into consideration how the web has drastically changed since micropayment first began being discussed back in the 90s. The web, of course, has shifted from one of a semantic web of information to a social web, which leverages socialization and sharing. So within that context, that's what we would like to present to you, our modified news micropayment model. And I'll let my colleague Jay start us off with that.
Hello, Alda. Thank you for having us. It's funny when you start talking about paying content, you inevitably split into two factions. Some say never pay for news. Some say it's inevitable. That there is evidence that people are more willing to pay than they used to. We also looked at SNS literature, and this is because this was the best source of literature for the social web, how things operate there. And then after we did that, we also looked at all the huge amounts of research and gossip or chatter and in the industry along with that academic data, and then we come up with what we're going to present to you today. People still have value in journalism. The problem is, particularly in the semantic web, until the advent of Twitter and so forth, we've recently begun to use, we've expected people to come to our sites to get journalism. It just doesn't necessarily work that way anymore. So you have great content, but you have no way to really get it out to people. That's where the social web comes in. They have logistical streams. They have those social networks that have naturally been built in which these things can be disseminated. So why not use them? If you look at the literature, it says there's 3 streams that you have to have in an online business model. You have to have value. News has that. You have to have logistics. SNS has that. We're proposing that you use those 2 to create a 3rd one, which is revenue stream, which is what we all are after, what the lifeblood of any business is. With that, I'll turn it over to Jeff to finish up.
We believe that our model would also work and have currency and applicability to broader media content, including entertainment. So we believe a future direction is to explore a modified media micropayment model. And then others in the literature, particularly a gentleman named Mr. Smith, has referred to mobile as the holy grail for micropayment. Many users, many people have already given up hope that we will ever be able to influence consumers and readers to pay for news content online. However, we're already naturally used to paying for content on the mobile phone, downloading ringtones, and so forth and so forth, and so on. So we believe that there's a possibility for a modified mobile news micropayment model as well in the future. That concludes my comments. I do look forward to your questions and continuing this conversation both here in person and online, where you can read our paper online and also look at my website, jeffreygrayfield.com.
Dozen News Challenge winners, most of them, I should say, they were different in terms of the geographic location, the years in which they won. They're spread among the different years, so some of them had finished their projects, some were just beginning. But they were all similar in the sense that I looked for ones who were attempting to start some kind of a news organization or platform, a body through which news would get put together in some fashion. So in analyzing the transcripts from these interviews, one of the big findings that I found is that these news innovators had rendered unproblematic this tension of professional logic and story logic, precisely because for them, the notion of journalism as a profession was less salient. They were more focused on journalism as practice. In other words, they saw journalism as an open source practice to be shared, as opposed to a proprietary profession to be protected. One of the more interesting things I found was in speaking with Richard Anderson at Village Soup in Maine. You may be familiar with the project there. And Village Soup received its grant to, let me just back up. The basic idea of Village Soup is that they have a website where businesses and citizens can pay for certain access to publish on the site. And what's truly unique about this is that the outsiders use the very same CMS, the same online platform as the professional journalists themselves. And so that's pretty different. Knight gave them some money to create an open source version of this and to be able to share that in the communities. And initially, Richard Anderson was a little skeptical because he was worried about the open source part. He was a little worried about competition, how others could invade his territory. And then he told me that he realized that he had little to fear because mainstream news organizations had invested too much pride and too much capital in their legacy proprietary systems. This is how he put it. He said, with a system like Village Soups, you get open access to businesses and to citizen journalists, and to be able to share content from one side to the other side. These are all things that large newspapers' legacy systems were never designed to be. In essence, a logic of professional control precludes news organizations from imagining from the get-go that publishing systems could be such that other people, the outsiders, could actually publish coexistent on the same platform with the journalists, so that they could have the sort of equal access to the tools of publication. That is a radical shift in mindset. Another thing that they expressed was some frustration with the Knight Foundation in terms of getting the support they felt like they needed internally to be able to, this is critical, go from ideas to institutions. In other words, as one grantee put it, the Knight Foundation used to fund institutions that had ideas. Now it funds ideas by sometimes individuals. It funds seemingly one-off projects. The challenge is taking those from one-off projects to sustainable institutions, to actually institutionalize them. That seems to be one of the critical challenges for innovation in journalism moving forward, is this idea of how do we take these growing things and actually give them deep roots and institutionalize them in some fashion.
I've noticed that most newsrooms haven't actually embraced the medium as a whole different thing, as the internet as a whole different thing. And I think everybody has talked about this on the corridors in every conference or every newsroom we go. We're still stuck a bit on the paper metaphor. People really don't want to leave the paper metaphor. One of the things I would criticize, for instance, on New York Times' approach to what they say is going to be their iPad application is that there's still, I don't know, it's my opinion, a lot of people's probably opinion is that they still think it's my grandfather that reads a newspaper is going to grab the iPad and read the newspaper like he's reading it. I think the iPad, it's more related to an online interface than to the paper interface. The Times Reader, although being a very interesting project, was never a very successful one, and probably for a reason. I'm not saying that people wouldn't pay for a really good product. It's just that's not the way, or the natural path for things to go. I mean, the iPad is a fantastic, well, a few people have it around. The iPad is just, it's too good to be true. It's just, everything's, the design, everything's slick, perfect. It's the best screen ever, and it's good to have on your lap, it's good to travel around, but it's not like something that you treat as a newspaper, or probably even a book. But I mean, newspapers, it's kind of different because you scan, you don't read. So probably we should get over that idea of trying to always emulate the paper metaphor, the paper version on all that metaphor. So, for instance, The Guardian in printed and online, and The Guardian uses a specific typeface. And then when he did the iPhone application, he changed that typeface, which is called The Guardian, to Georgia. And you only notice that if you're actually looking at it and seeing how it works. So that's the kind of moves, of things we should be doing and should be thinking about. People should get a bit of a grasp of what they should be doing and not just throw things online. I mean, the web is endless, but people's capacity to read on the web and our patience is not endless. So let's just try to get things done properly. So in conclusion, it's a new medium. Let's take advantage of it, use its potential and design for it. In other words, don't take your bathing suit to the North Pole because it's still clothing, but it won't fit, it won't be the appropriate one to have there.